By the dawn of the 20th century, the great powers of Europe were in a frantic race. This wasn't a race for gold or glory but for territory. They were carving up the vast continent of Africa like a cake, each nation desperate to claim its slice. This period is famously known as the Scramble for Africa. Britain had its vast swathes of red on the map stretching from Egypt to South Africa. France controlled huge territories in the west and north. Even smaller nations like Belgium had staked their claims. For a newly unified country like Italy, watching from the sidelines was, well, agonizing. They too wanted an empire, a place in the sun. Italy's earlier colonial ambitions had met with disaster. An attempt to conquer Ethiopia in the 1890s had ended in a humiliating defeat at the Battle of Adwa. This was a shocking event for a European power. The memory stung badly. The Italian government and public were eager to erase this national embarrassment. They looked across the Mediterranean Sea and saw a tempting prize. Tripolitania Cyrenaica, known collectively today as Libya. These territories were vast, strategically located, and perceived as being weakly held by a declining power. The lands of Libya were part of the sprawling but creaking Ottoman Empire. For centuries the Ottomans had been a dominant force, but by 1911 they were often called the sick man of Europe. For Italy, Libya seemed like the perfect target. It was geographically close, which would make it easier to control and supply than colonies further afield. Italian nationalists also spun historical tales, claiming the land as a rightful inheritance, harking back to the days when the Roman Empire controlled the North African coast. Imperial ambition, national pride, perceived opportunity. This blend created a powerful momentum for war. The political climate in Italy was heating up. A powerful nationalist movement fueled by newspapers and influential politicians pushed relentlessly for an invasion. They argued that if Italy did not act quickly, another European power might snatch Libya, France or Germany from under their noses. The pressure became immense. The Italian government, seeing a chance to unite the country behind a popular cause and secure a valuable colonial possession, began drawing up plans. They saw the Ottoman Empire as too weak and distracted by internal problems, particularly in the volatile Balkan region, to put up a serious fight. In late September 1911, the moment arrived. Italy, confident in its modern military and naval superiority, issued an ultimatum to the Ottoman Empire. Hand over control of Tripolitania Cyrenaica or face war. The Ottomans, unwilling to simply surrender their territory, tried to negotiate a diplomatic solution. But Italy's mind was already made up. On September 29, 1911, with the ultimatum rejected, Italy declared war. The plan was for a swift, overwhelming assault. Italian leaders believed that a powerful show of force would quickly crush any resistance and lead to a speedy victory, securing their new colony with minimal fuss. The Italian Navy, a formidable force in the Mediterranean, led the charge. Warships appeared off the Libyan coast, their powerful guns aimed at the main port cities. They began a heavy bombardment of Tripoli, Homs, Tobruk, and other coastal centers. The Ottoman garrisons were small and ill-equipped to withstand such an onslaught from the sea. Within a few weeks, Italian troops were able to land and secure these key cities. The Italian flag was raised over Tripoli on October 5th. From Rome it looked as though the war was already won. The press celebrated a glorious victory, and the government declared the annexation of Libya. However, the initial Italian confidence was dangerously misplaced. While they had successfully captured the coastal cities, their control extended no further. The vast, arid interior of the country remained firmly in the hands of their opponents. The Italian commanders had severely underestimated the will to resist. They had assumed the local Libyan population would either be indifferent or would even welcome them as liberators from Ottoman rule. They could not have been more wrong. The invasion sparked a fierce and determined resistance movement that united local Libyan tribes with the remaining Ottoman forces. The Italian advance ground to a halt just beyond the city walls. What was supposed to be a quick colonial conquest rapidly devolved into a frustrating and bloody war of attrition. The Italian soldiers, trained for conventional European battles, found themselves fighting a difficult guerrilla war in an unfamiliar and hostile environment. They held the ports, but the moment they ventured into the desert, they were harassed by highly mobile and motivated fighters. The dream of a swift victory had evaporated in the dust of the Libyan desert, replaced by the grim reality of a long and difficult struggle. The resistance to the Italian invasion was a powerful combination of Ottoman professionalism and local Libyan ferocity. The Ottoman Empire couldn't send a large army. British control over Egypt blocked direct routes. Italian naval dominance kept the sea lanes closed, so they had to be creative, sending a small cadre of determined young officers. Among them, Major Enver Pasha, and a staff captain named Mustafa Kemal, the future Ataturk. These officers were skilled in unconventional warfare and experts at motivating others to fight. Enver Pasha and Mustafa Kemal worked tirelessly to forge an effective fighting force. They brought military discipline and tactical knowledge to the fighters. The Libyan tribal warriors already possessed incredible courage and an intimate knowledge of the desert terrain. This alliance was formidable. Charismatic local leaders like Omar al-Mukhtar led the resistance. The Libyan fighters waged a brilliant guerrilla campaign, lightning raids on Italian supply lines. They ambushed Italian patrols, then vanished back into the vastness of the desert. For Italian soldiers, stuck in coastal enclaves, it was nerve-wracking and demoralizing. The fighting was brutal and unforgiving on both sides. Frustrated, the Italians responded with increasing harshness. They carried out reprisals against villages suspected of supporting the guerrillas, and established concentration camps. The war became a grim cycle of attack and counterattack. Neither side could land a decisive blow. Italy poured in more men and resources, but the resistance, supplied by the Ottomans and fueled by defense of their homeland, refused to break. This new form of warfare, organized military leadership combined with popular insurgency, was a sign of things to come. Lessons learned by officers like Mustafa Kemal in Libya would prove invaluable later. The conflict was a brutal testing ground for the very nature of combat. The old rules of war began to break down, replaced by a more complex and savage reality that would define the century ahead. The frustrating stalemate on the ground pushed the Italians to look for a solution in the sky. The airplane was, in 1911, a fragile and wondrous new invention. Most military leaders saw it as a novelty, perhaps useful for scouting, but little more. The Italians, however, were about to change that perception forever. On October 23, 1911, Captain Carlo Piazza flew a Blériot 11 monoplane. He flew over the Turkish lines near Tripoli. This was the world's first ever aerial reconnaissance mission in a time of war. For the first time, a commander could get a bird's-eye view of the enemy's position, a revolutionary advantage in warfare. Just over a week later, on November 1, 1911, Second Lieutenant Giulio Gavati, he leaned out of his flimsy aircraft and dropped 4 small grenades. The target, an Ottoman camp at Ain Zara. Each bomb was no bigger than an orange, but their impact on history was immense. This was the world's first ever aerial bombardment. While the physical damage was minimal, the psychological effect was significant. Soldiers on the ground were now vulnerable to attack from above. A new dimension had been added to the battlefield, the vertical dimension. The use of aircraft in Libya quickly expanded. Pilots began carrying out regular bombing runs. They even dropped propaganda leaflets urging the Libyans to surrender. These early missions were incredibly dangerous. The planes were unreliable. They were made of wood and fabric. Their engines could fail at any moment. Pilots flew in open cockpits exposed to the elements. They were exposed to rifle fire from the ground. Despite the risks, these aviation pioneers proved the immense potential of air power, for attack, for reconnaissance, and for psychological warfare. Alongside the airplane, another modern weapon made its debut in Libya, the armored car. The Italians deployed 2 Fiat Terni armored vehicles equipped with machine guns. These early land battleships could travel across rough terrain. They provided mobile fire support for the infantry, and protection from enemy bullets. Though used only in limited numbers, their appearance, like that of the airplane, signaled a fundamental shift in military technology. The Italo-Turkish War was becoming a laboratory for the weapons of the future. As the war in Libya dragged on through the winter of 1911 and into 1912, the Italian government grew increasingly desperate for a decisive victory. The conflict was proving far more costly in blood and treasure than anyone had anticipated. Public opinion at home was starting to waver. The Italian high command realized that simply pouring more troops into the Libyan desert was not working. They looked for pressure points elsewhere to force the Sultan to the negotiating table. Their gaze turned to the Aegean Sea. In spring 1912, Italy launched a new phase. An Italian naval fleet sailed into the Aegean and began a systematic campaign to seize the Dodecanese Islands. Rhodes, the strategically important island, was an Ottoman possession just off the coast of modern Turkey. The islands had only small Ottoman garrisons and were highly vulnerable to Italy's powerful navy. The landings were swift and successful. By May 1912, Italy held Rhodes and the surrounding chain. That move brought the war much closer to the Ottoman heartland. The escalation reshaped the strategic picture. The seizure of the Dodecanese directly threatened Constantinople. It proved the Italian navy could operate with impunity in the Aegean, and even potentially menace the Dardanelles Strait. The action sent shockwaves through the Ottoman government and the great powers of Europe. Austria-Hungary was especially alarmed by Italian expansion into the Balkans and eastern Mediterranean. The pressure on the Ottoman Empire was now immense. They were fighting a losing battle on two fronts, and trouble was brewing much closer to home: Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro. These states were mobilizing their armies, preparing to launch war to drive the Ottomans out of Europe once and for all. Facing an unwinnable war and the imminent Balkan threat, the Ottoman government knew it had to make a choice. Faced with the impending threat of the Balkan Wars, the Ottoman Empire had no choice but to seek peace with Italy. Negotiations took place in Switzerland, and on October 18, 1912, the two sides signed the Treaty of Auchi, also known as the First Treaty of Lausanne. The terms were complex, designed to save face for the Ottomans while giving Italy what it wanted. Officially, the Sultan granted autonomy to the provinces of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. In reality, this was a fig leaf. The Ottoman Empire agreed to withdraw all its officers and troops, effectively ceding the territory to Italy. In return, Italy was supposed to withdraw from the Dodecanese Islands, but they found reasons to delay, and the islands would remain under Italian control for decades. For Italy, the war was a qualified success. They had finally gained the colony they so desperately craved, and the victory helped to soothe the national ego after the humiliation in Ethiopia. However, their control over Libya was anything but secure. The guerrilla war did not end with the treaty. Local Libyan resistance, now without Ottoman support, continued to fight against Italian rule for another 20 years. The pacification of Libya would be a long, brutal, and costly affair, a constant drain on Italian resources that brought little economic benefit. The war that was meant to be a short, glorious adventure turned into a decades-long colonial nightmare. For the Ottoman Empire, the defeat was another nail in its coffin. The loss of its last African territory was a blow to its prestige, and the war had exposed its military weakness to the world. Just as the Ottomans were signing the treaty with Italy, the Balkan League declared war, starting the First Balkan War. The Ottoman army, exhausted and demoralized, was quickly overwhelmed, losing almost all of its remaining territory in Europe. The Italo-Turkish War acted as the direct catalyst for the Balkan Wars, a series of conflicts that dramatically reshaped the map of southeastern Europe and created the intense rivalries that would explode into World War I just 2 years later. This little war in the Libyan desert, often overlooked by historians, was therefore profoundly important. It was the dress rehearsal for the First World War. It pioneered the use of modern military technologies like the airplane and the armored car, which would come to dominate 20th-century battlefields. It demonstrated the effectiveness of guerrilla warfare against a conventional army. And most significantly, it fatally weakened the Ottoman Empire and directly triggered the Balkan Wars, setting in motion the chain of events that led humanity into the catastrophe of 1914. It was, in many ways, the war that invented modern combat. The Italo-Turkish War, 1911-1912, was fought over Libya. Italy seized the territory from the Ottoman Empire, marking the start of modern colonial Libya. It also made history as the first war with aerial bombing and armored cars, and it helped set the stage for World War I.